Look at the strongest crane in the world today. It is a marvel of modern engineering, powered by massive diesel engines and high tensile steel. But if you took that crane to a specific quarry in Lebanon, it would snap in half trying to lift what lies there. We are talking about the stone of the pregnant woman in Baalbek. It weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. To put that in perspective, that is equal to 3 Boeing 747 airplanes stacked on top of each other. And yet, right next to it are stones almost as large that were not just cut, but moved. They were lifted 20 feet into the air and placed perfectly into a temple wall. How? They didn't have hydraulics. They didn't have steel cables. In many cases, they didn't even use the wheel. For centuries, historians simply said slaves and ropes. But when modern engineers ran the math, they realized that explanation was impossible. The friction alone would have snapped the ropes. The weight would have crushed wooden rollers into dust. So, how did they do it? Did they possess a lost technology? Did they understand physics in a way we have forgotten? Today, we are going to reconstruct the impossible methods of the ancient engineers. From liquid roads to bronze ball bearings, we are uncovering the secrets of moving mountains. Chapter 1. The Trap of the Wheel. When we think of transport, we think of wheels. It is the greatest invention in history, right? But for ancient megalith builders, the wheel was actually a trap. If you put a 50-ton block on a wooden cart, the axles will snap instantly. Even if you built the cart out of iron, the wheels would focus all that weight onto a tiny point of contact on the ground. The cart wouldn't roll, it would sink into the earth like a knife cutting through butter. The ancients knew this. That is why, when the Egyptians built the pyramids, they didn't use wheels, they used sledges. But dragging a sledge over sand creates massive friction. For a long time, we thought they just used brute force, thousands of men pulling until they collapsed. But then, archaeologists noticed something strange in a wall painting from the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep. It shows a massive statue being dragged by 172 men, but look closely at the front of the sledge. There is a person standing there, pouring water onto the sand. For decades, experts thought this was just a ceremonial ritual, a blessing for the gods. They were wrong. Physicists recently tested this. If you drag a heavy object over dry sand, the sand piles up in front of the sledge, creating a ramp that makes it impossible to move. But if you add the exact right amount of water, roughly 5% of the volume of the sand, something incredible happens. The water creates capillary bridges between the grains. The sand stops moving. It becomes hard, like a paved road. This simple trick cut the required pulling force in half. They didn't need magic, they just needed a watering can. But water works on sand. What happens when you need to move a 300-ton block over solid rock, hundreds of miles away from the desert? Chapter 2. The Ice Highways of the Forbidden City. Let's jump forward in time, but stay in the past. We're in China, year 1420. The Ming Dynasty is building the Forbidden City. They needed to move massive stone blocks, some weighing over 300 tons, from a quarry 40 miles away. Using wheels was out of question. The roads were too bumpy and the stones were too heavy. Using wooden rollers was too risky. The stones could crush them or slip off. So the Chinese engineers waited. They waited for winter. They dug wells every 500 meters along the entire 40-mile route. In the dead of night, when the temperature dropped, they flooded the road. The water froze into a smooth sheet of ice. But ice alone isn't enough. It's slippery, but a 300-ton rock will still generate friction. So they added a secret ingredient that sounds ridiculous today: sludge. They created a lubricant made of liquid mud. When placed between the wooden sledge and the ice road, it created a surface with almost zero friction. Historical records show that these 300-ton stones were not moved by thousands of men, but a small team, sliding massive monoliths across the countryside like they were sliding a drink down a bar top. Chapter 3: The Thunderstone and the Ball Bearing. But water and ice have limits. What happens when you need to move the biggest stone ever moved by human hands? This is the story of the Thunderstone. It sits in St. Petersburg, Russia, as the base of the statue of Peter the Great. It weighs 1,500 tons. That is heavier than the stones at Baalbek. And it was moved in the 1700s, long before the invention of the industrial crane. The engineer in charge, Marinos Carbouris, had a nightmare on his hands. He had to move this rock 6 kilometers through a swamp. If he used wooden rollers, they would crumble. If he used a sledge, it would get stuck. His solution was centuries ahead of its time. He invented the linear ball bearing. He built 2 long tracks made of copper. Then he carved out the bottom of the sledge to match. Between the track and the sledge, he placed 6-inch spheres made of a distinct alloy of bronze and brass. The massive rock didn't drag, it rolled. But here's the twist. He didn't build a 6-kilometer track. He couldn't afford that much copper. He only built a short section. As the rock rolled forward, workmen behind the stone would pick up the track and the balls, run to the front, and lay them down again. It was a continuous cycle. They were building the road as they traveled. Using this method, 2 windlasses, basically giant winches turned by men, were able to pull 1,500 tons. It was so efficient that while the stone was moving, the stone cutters were actually sitting on top of it, shaping the rock as it rolled through the forest. Chapter 4: The Mystery of the Walking Giants. Now let's leave the machinery behind and go to the most isolated place on Earth, Easter Island. The Moai statues, we've all seen them, giant heads staring out to sea. Some weigh over 80 tons. For years, historians assumed the islanders cut down all the trees to make rollers to drag the statues. They claimed this ecological disaster is why the civilization collapsed. But local legends said something different. The oral history of the Ravanui people clearly states the statues walked. Archaeologists laughed at this. Statues don't walk. But in 2012, a team of researchers decided to test the legend. They noticed something crucial about the statues that hadn't been erected yet. They had bellies. They were shaped with a forward center of gravity. They weren't designed to lie flat. They were designed to stand. The team tied ropes to the top of a replica statue. 3 teams of people. 1 team pulled back. 2 teams pulled side to side. By rocking the statue left and right, the massive stone figure leaned forward, twisted, and took a step, then another. They didn't need rollers. They didn't need cranes. They didn't need to destroy their forest. They used the statue's own design to make it waddle like a penguin. The statues really did walk. The legend was literally true. We just didn't understand the physics. Chapter 5: The Lost Sound Technology. But even with ice, sand, and ball bearings, there are still mysteries that keep engineers awake at night. We return to where we started, Baalbek, or the granite blocks in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. Some of these stones are placed so precisely that you cannot fit a razor blade between them, and they're hundreds of feet in the air. Lifting a 70-ton stone straight up is exponentially harder than dragging it. Ramps would need miles long. Levers would snap. This is where the theories get strange. There are ancient texts from Egypt to Tibet that speak of sonic levitation. The idea of sound waves focused in a specific way can reduce gravity or vibrate a stone to make it weightless. We know today that acoustic levitation is real. We can levitate small beads and water droplets using sound waves in a lab. But a 70-ton rock? We have no evidence they could generate that kind of power. But we do know that the Great Pyramid is designed with acoustic resonance in mind. Is it possible that the tools they used weren't physical hammers and chisels, but tools of vibration and frequency? Or perhaps they just mastered a form of leverage that we're too impatient to replicate. Conclusion. When we look at these ancient megaliths, we feel small, not just because the stones are big, but because the minds that moved them were giant. They didn't have diesel, they didn't have steel. They had patience, physics, and a deep understanding of the natural world. They turned sand into roads, water into glue, and made stone giants walk. Maybe we haven't lost their technology. Maybe we have just lost their way of thinking. If you enjoyed this journey into the impossible engineering of the past, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're digging up new history every week, era by era. Thanks for watching.